You made it to today's episode. If you're a fan of horror and macabre, you're in for a treat. We have scoured the internet to find the most disturbing and unsettling videos that were never meant to be seen. Brace yourself for a journey into the darkest corners of the web. Very few people can say they survived almost being killed by a serial killer, but not the Carla of this story. She can conveniently cross it off her checklist. Watch the video to find out about the man behind her abduction and how the police found her.
This video shows police rescuing Kayla Brown from a shipping container where she had been kept for 2 months. On August 1st, 2016, Kayla and her boyfriend Charles arrived to work on Todd Kohlhepp's 95-acre property. Todd immediately took Charles's life and took Kayla captive in this shipping container for over 20 hours a day. During this time, Todd was logging into Charles's Facebook account pretending to be him to ward off any worried friends or family members. After a month, investigators finally got access to the Facebook account and saw the messages between Kayla and Charles talking about them working on Todd's property right before they went missing. So on November 3rd, investigators made their way to Todd's property, and there they received the biggest shock of their lives. Banging noises were heard coming from inside of the shipping container. They cut the metal lock off, and inside was Kayla, who they described being chained up like a dog. Finally, after 2 horrifying months, Kayla Brown was rescued. But that's not the end of the story. Kayla went on to give an interview with Dr. Phil in which she stated that Todd would often talk about wanting to build a house for the 2 of them, complete with a soundproof area where Kayla would be held indefinitely. However, following Kayla's rescue, investigators found a pre-dug hole next to where Charles was buried and believed that Todd was just days, if not hours, away from killing her too. Investigators also discovered reviews on Amazon for padlocks that Todd had purchased. And Kayla and Charles were not Todd's only victims. It turns out that Todd Kohlhepp was actually a serial killer.
No one can really say they know the exact moment bad disasters are going to happen, but perhaps these men knew, and that's why they took photos before disaster struck.
Photos before disaster. Number 3. The Omagh bombing. The red car in this photo contained a bomb that killed 29 people and injured 220 others. The man and the child both survived, but sadly, the photographer of the photo didn't. Still, more than 20 years after, no one's been convicted of this crime. Number 2. 14-year-old Keith Sapsford hid in the wheel of a flight leaving Sydney towards Japan. John Gilpson, an amateur photographer, was testing his new camera lens and unwittingly caught Keith Sapsford's 200-foot plunge to death. You could only imagine how terrified this 14-year-old would be. Number 1. The last image of the Uruguayan Flight 571. It crashed in the Andes on October 13, 1972. It took so long to find the wreckage because the reported area was wrong initially. 27 out of the 45 people survived the initial crash. Survivors were then eventually forced to cannibalize the dead to stay alive. 16 people were rescued 72 days later. Tomorrow isn't always promised.
Looking back on history, there are really some bad times, and aside from the popular ones like slavery and the Holocaust, these are some that might not be so openly talked about in public spaces because they are too gruesome that people forget about them.
Top 3 disturbing history facts most people don't know. Number 1. The Bath School disaster. In 1927, a man named Andrew in Michigan lost his seat for the treasury position. In retaliation, he blew up a school, killed quite a few children and some staff. He suffered a head trauma, leaving him insane. And before this event, he even murdered his own family. Number 2. Native American boarding schools. This movement was led by the slogan, "Kill the Indian, save the man." Hundreds of thousands of Native American children and women were rounded up and taken to boarding schools. They were forced to change their clothes, their hair, their culture, and their language. If they spoke their native language or refused to do these things, they were murdered. This continued up until the 1970s and the 1990s in Canada. Number 3. The Rwandan genocide. It lasted 4 months. 1 million people died, most by being hacked to death by machetes. These events may be disturbing, but education could keep us from making the same mistakes again.
There are horrors as ancient as the beginning of time, and such is the Edimu. Horror folklores have it that one is highly susceptible to being possessed by one if you are asleep, and worst yet, your soul might be sucked out of you.
Ancient Horrors Part 8. The Adimu. The Adimu were a type of demon in Sumerian religion. They were envisioned as the ghosts of those who were not buried properly after their death. They were considered vengeful towards the living, and were known to possess people if they did not respect certain taboos, such as prohibition against eating ox meat. They were thought to cause disease and inspire criminal behavior in the living, but could sometimes be appeased by funeral banquets or libations. The Adimu were also thought to be wind spirits that had the ability to suck the life out of the susceptible and the sleeping, mostly the young.
Ever heard the legend of the Bloody Benders? It is a horror story about flesh-eating humans who see humans coming from a distance and start cooking spices to lure unknowing passers-by to their slaughtering.
Have you heard of the urban legend called the Bloody Benders? A traveler was walking down a rural road as the sun began to set. He could smell someone was cooking, and he saw a small farmhouse. He decided to stop and ask if he could buy some dinner. There was a young man in the yard chopping wood, and an old lady by the back door. She said they would be happy to have him for dinner, and that he could stay the night as well. He gladly paid and followed inside. A young woman was setting the table. The father appeared and introduced himself as Mr. Bender. The son came inside and everyone sat down. The room was simple but clean. There was a blanket covering the entrance to the kitchen. They sat the traveler in the chair before the blanket, calling it the, quote, seat of honor. The son went behind the blanket and came back serving peas and biscuits. Then he returned to the kitchen, probably to go check on the meat. The traveler did not know what kind of meat it was, but there sure was a delicious smell of onions and gravy. The rest of the family peppered him with questions about his travels, but he was hungry and ready for the main course. He finally dropped a hint by asking what kind of meat they were cooking. The son pulled the blanket aside and shouted, "You!" and plunged a meat cleaver into the traveler's head. The dead man slumped forward onto his plate. Several weeks later, a traveler was walking down the same road as the sun began to set. He could smell someone was cooking long before he saw the small farmhouse. He decided to stop in and ask if he could buy some dinner.
Do you know the legend of the Black Dog? It is the story of how prisoners ate fellow prisoners to stay alive in their cell, and each and every one of them starts to hallucinate about a black dog.
This former prison has a crazy history of witchcraft, cannibals, and scary dog ghosts. Today we're in central London to bring you more supernatural tales and spooky stories. This is the site of the former Newgate prison, just inside the original city walls. The Old Bailey sits here today, but this place held some of the city's worst criminals over the space of 700 years. The legend of the Black Dog is believed to have started around 1596, when a scholar was imprisoned in Newgate after being accused of being a sorcerer. This was during a huge famine in the country, and not long after being arrested, the scholar was eaten by other prisoners who had resorted to cannibalism to keep themselves alive. After eating the scholar, the prisoners responsible were driven mad and began to see the ghost of a black dog roaming the prison. Some eventually managed to escape the prison in an attempt to flee the black dog, but it is said that the ghost chased them and ate them one by one.
Has NASA ever been to space? There's always one conspiracy or the other with the space agency, and this one is pretty bad. People have come out to say they won't be fooled, as you can see glaring evidence that the ISS NASA claims they are in when experimenting is a lie.
NASA has been exposed for lying to us. Recently, fans of NASA's page have noticed unusual things in NASA's old and recent videos. They have called out many American astronauts' experimentation videos in the ISS, assuring that they were fake. The ISS is an international space station. It is located in space, meaning there is no gravity in the space station. Now, people are not denying the fact that the space station exists. we do know that it does exist. We can sometimes see it through telescopes, and there are engineers inside the station as we speak. However, NASA has been called out for fake experimentations that were not conducted in the ISS. And here is the proof. In this video, you can clearly see that their movement is very unusual. Zero-G does not act in this kind of motion. One of the astronauts clearly hides an elastic harness that was visible on camera. And when it comes to long hair in women, they don't just stay up and not move. This astronaut's hair has clearly been hairsprayed. It's not moving at all. This is how hair really moves in outer space. In this clip, this astronaut's harness goes through a malfunction and gravity somehow spawns in the station. In this clip, we can see NASA officials editing a video of an astronaut explaining water in zero gravity using a green ball. He was never in space. And in this clip, we can see bad editing skills, where the green screen transition went wrong. And in this one, well, it's very clear. We all can see two elastic harnesses holding this astronaut from the back to keep him off the ground. Like, has NASA ever been to space? Or was it another authority that built the ISS and NASA was just the puppet? You tell me.
Have you ever seen an asteroid hit the moon? Hold on to your horses for this clip you are about to see. It is quite eruptive.
These are videos humans were never meant to see, part 19. Okay, so we all know how the moon gets hit by asteroids. But have you ever actually seen the moon get hit by one? If not, you're about to witness it. This video is both extremely fascinating and terrifying. Just look at the explosion this little asteroid causes. Just imagine if this asteroid was bigger.
For more horror and creepy content, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notifications so you never miss a video. We hope you enjoyed our selection of unsettling and spine-chilling tales. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled for the unordinary.